The universe had long dismissed humanity as an insignificant race, too fragmented and reckless to pose any real threat. The Galactic Council barely acknowledged Earth's existence, allowing it to linger on the fringes of space, seen as a backwater planet with no strategic value. But everything changed when the Krell Dominion arrived. The Krell were warlords of the void, their conquests spanning thousands of systems. They moved like a plague, consuming planets, enslaving civilizations, and razing anything that resisted. Their eyes turned to Earth, expecting an easy victory. Humanity, after all, had spent most of its history fighting itself. But the Krell weren't prepared for the unexpected. When the invasion began, Earth's defenses crumbled within weeks. The United Nations Space Force fought valiantly, but was outmatched. Major cities fell, nations surrendered, and the Krell's banners rose over once proud human strongholds. The last remnants of Earth's military retreated underground, scattered and desperate. And then, against all odds, the tides turned, not by soldiers, not by generals, but by those whom Earth had once cast aside. The traitors. They were the outcasts, the exiles, the condemned. Once labeled as criminals, rebels, and deserters, they had fled Earth years ago to the outer rim of the galaxy, finding refuge in lawless systems. They had turned to piracy, smuggling, and mercenary work. The Galactic Council despised them, and Earth had long considered them disgraces. But they were still human. The moment Earth fell, the exiles received the news. Among them was Captain Elias Rourke, a former fleet commander sentenced to death for leading an unsanctioned attack against an alien dignitary. He had spent the last decade running guns for rogue factions, but when he saw the Krell banners over New York, something in him snapped. Earth was his home, and no matter how much it had rejected him, he wouldn't let it burn. Rourke wasn't the only one. Across the galaxy, other outcasts, hackers, warlords, rogue AI specialists, and battle-hardened mercenaries watched in fury as the Krell turned their birthplace into a graveyard. They weren't heroes. They weren't loyal citizens. But they were human, and that was enough. They began to strike in the only way they knew. Dirty. The first attack came in the form of sabotage. The Krell's supply chains started failing. Their weapons malfunctioned mid-battle. Vital intelligence was leaked to the Resistance. Ships exploded in dry docks, and high-ranking Krell officers were found dead in their chambers, throats slit by unseen hands. Then came the open war. A fleet of ships, patched together from stolen vessels and black market tech, emerged from the darkness of space. They had no flags, no official allegiance, only a single message broadcast to every remaining human resistance cell. We are still here, and we are not done. They struck hard and fast. Rourke's fleet, the so-called Ghost Armada, operated outside the rules of engagement. They didn't fight fair. They hacked into the Krell's systems, turned their own war machines against them, and used asteroid fields as deadly ambush points. They played dirty, because war was never meant to be noble. The Krell, for all their might, weren't prepared for an enemy who had already lived in the shadows. They weren't ready for a force that didn't play by the rules, that knew the back alleys of the galaxy better than they did. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't fighting itself. It wasn't divided by borders, politics, or ideologies. The outcasts, the rebels, the abandoned, they had become Earth's saviors, fighting for a world that had once turned its back on them. The war was far from over. The Krell were still powerful, their forces vast. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated humanity, and humanity never forgot its grudges. The Krell didn't understand what was happening. Their war doctrine was built on overwhelming force, sweeping invasions, planetary bombardments, and swift subjugation. But against these human insurgents, Their usual tactics were useless. The Ghost Armada wasn't an organized military. It was a network of outlaws, criminals, and exiles who had spent their lives surviving in the darkest corners of the galaxy. The first major blow came at the Battle of Titan's Shadow. Rourke had intercepted a Krell transmission revealing an incoming reinforcement fleet. The Dominion was sending 3 dreadnoughts, massive warships that could level entire cities with orbital strikes. If they reached Earth's occupied space, it would crush what little resistance remained. Rourke had no fleet that could match them in open combat. He had stolen warships, barely functioning battlecruisers, and a handful of fighters. Nothing that could go toe-to-toe with the Krell's might. But he wasn't planning on fighting fair. His plan was insane. The Ghost Armada planted false intel, feeding the Krell an illusion of a retreating human fleet in the debris field of Titan's Shadow, a region littered with the wreckage of forgotten battles. The Krell, arrogant in their superiority, took the bait and entered the field at full speed, eager to crush the scattered remains of humanity's so-called saviors. That's when the trap was sprung. Hidden within the wreckage were scavenged nuclear warheads, repurposed mining explosives, and a network of remotely piloted freighters, all rigged to detonate at Rourke's command. The moment the Krell dreadnoughts crossed the threshold, the stars lit up in a violent explosion. 2 of the 3 massive warships were instantly obliterated, their hulls torn apart by a cascade of detonations. The third, severely damaged and attempting to flee, was swarmed by the Ghost Armada's ships. They weren't standard military vessels, but retrofitted pirate ships, cargo haulers turned into attack craft, and old Earth frigates equipped with black market weaponry. They moved with a vicious unpredictability, slicing through the remaining Krell forces with brutal efficiency. Rourke personally led the final assault, piloting his aging but deadly strike cruiser, the Red Reaper, as it punched through the wounded dreadnought's defenses. His boarding team, consisting of former bounty hunters, cybernetic mercenaries, and assassins, stormed the command deck, cutting down the Krell officers with ruthless precision. By the time the last Krell commander fell, Rourke stood over his corpse and sent a single message to the rest of the Dominion. "The hunted have become the hunters. We are coming for you." Across the galaxy, the message spread like wildfire. Humanity, once dismissed as fractured and weak, had just taken down 3 of the Krell's strongest warships. It wasn't just a victory, it was a declaration of war. The Galactic Council, which had refused to intervene during Earth's fall, now watched with uneasy fascination. They had assumed humanity would crumble, that the Krell would be unchallenged. But now? Now the outcasts, the exiled, the so-called traitors, were leading a rebellion that was turning the tides. And for the first time, the Krell hesitated. Rourke knew this was only the beginning. The Dominion wouldn't retreat, not yet. They were wounded, but a wounded predator was even more dangerous. The next battle wouldn't be as easy. But that was fine, because for the first time in history, humanity wasn't fighting itself. They were fighting together. The Krell responded with fury. Within days of their devastating loss at Titan's Shadow, they launched a brutal counteroffensive. They targeted human colonies in the outer systems, burning settlements to the ground and massacring civilians in a show of force. Their message was clear: resistance would be met with annihilation. But humanity had already passed the point of fear. For every colony the Krell destroyed, another rose up in defiance. The Ghost Armada's victories had sparked something Earth had lost long ago: unity. Underground resistance cells, scattered survivors, and even some remnants of the old Earth military began coordinating with Rourke's forces. Smugglers who once worked only for credits now ran weapons to the rebellion. Black market engineers designed war machines from salvaged Krell tech. Scientists who had fled Earth before the invasion now returned, bringing with them stolen alien schematics. The fight was no longer about survival. It was about vengeance. Rourke didn't waste time. He knew the Krell would strike hard, but they still underestimated humanity's resourcefulness. The next phase of the war wouldn't be about brute force. It would be about unraveling the Dominion from within. They needed to hit something bigger than just warships. They needed to shatter the Krell's war machine. The answer came from an unlikely source. Varana Kale, a former intelligence operative who had once worked for the Galactic Council before being branded a traitor for exposing their corruption. She had spent years in exile, building her own network of informants and spies. When she joined the rebellion, she brought something priceless: knowledge. The Krell aren't invincible, she explained in a war council aboard Rourke's flagship. A holographic projection of the Dominion's supply routes flickered before them. They rely on centralized command hubs to coordinate their forces. Cut off their information flow, and they'll stumble. Disrupt their supply chains, and their forces will starve. Her target was Corthan Prime, a heavily fortified logistics station that controlled nearly half of the Krell's supply network in the sector. If it fell, the Dominion's war effort would grind to a halt. But taking it wouldn't be easy. It was guarded by planetary shields, orbital defenses, and a full fleet of Krell warships. A direct assault would be suicide. Rourke smirked. Good thing we don't fight fair. The plan was bold. Coyle's network infiltrated Corthan Prime weeks before the attack, planting false orders in the Dominion's communication lines. The Krell believed the station was under threat from a rival alien faction, so they redirected a significant portion of their fleet elsewhere. Meanwhile, the Ghost Armada used a stolen Krell freighter to slip past the outer defenses. Posing as a damaged supply ship, they were allowed to dock inside the station. The moment they touched down, the real battle began. Rourke led the assault team, storming through Corthan Prime's corridors with a mix of human rebels, exiled soldiers, and cybernetically enhanced mercenaries. The Krell were caught off guard. Half their security forces had been reassigned based on the false intelligence. Within hours, they reached the station's control center. Kyle hacked into the systems, rerouting supply shipments to human-controlled sectors and shutting down Dominion communications across the entire region. But just as victory seemed certain, the Krell's trap was revealed. A hidden reinforcement fleet emerged from hyperspace, one of the Dominion's elite war divisions, led by High Warlord Vesic himself. Unlike the other Krell commanders, Vesic had studied humanity's resistance. He had learned from their victories, and he had come prepared. The orbital bombardment began instantly. The shields protecting Corthan Prime were still active, but it wouldn't be long before they failed. The rebels were now trapped inside, with no way out. This was never going to be easy, Rourke muttered, gripping his rifle as the alarm sirens blared. Kale's fingers flew across the control panel. I might have an idea, but you're not going to like it. She pointed to a hidden override command, one that would detonate the station's core. It would destroy Corthan Prime, the supply networks, and every Krell ship in range, but it would also leave them stranded in deep space with no way home. Rourke exhaled. We've survived worse. With a single command, Kale activated the countdown. The battle wasn't over yet. The station trembled as the countdown began. Red warning lights flashed across the control center, and automated alarms blared in a language that wasn't meant for human ears. The Krell outside didn't realize what was happening. Yet. But the moment they did, all hell would break loose. We've got 5 minutes before this place goes up, Kyle said, her voice sharp with urgency. We need an exit, now. Rourke's mind raced. The Ghost Armada's main ships were light years away, hiding in deep space. Their stolen freighter was useless. It had already been blasted apart in the firefight. The only way out was through the Krell warships in orbit. He tapped his comm. Valka, tell me you've got something. Valka was an ex-pirate-turned-ace pilot, infamous across the Outer Rim for hijacking enemy vessels. She had slipped into Corthan Prime with the rest of the strike team, but her mission had been different. Find a ride. Her voice crackled over the comm. I'm sitting in the hangar bay staring at a fully operational Krell destroyer. Think you can get here before I get bored? Rourke grinned. On our way. The team moved fast, cutting down Krell soldiers as they fought their way through the station's winding corridors. The enemy was in chaos. Some were still following their normal security protocols, unaware that the entire station was about to detonate. Others had figured it out and were desperately trying to override the system. It didn't matter. They were already too late. As Rourke and his team reached the hangar, they found Valka standing beside a Krell destroyer, a sleek, brutal-looking warship with weapons powerful enough to punch through planetary defenses. She leaned against the hull, chewing on a protein stick like she had all the time in the world. Took you long enough, she said, tossing Rourke a data pad. Ship's prepped. You're flying. I thought you were the pilot, Rourke shot back. Valka smirked. I steal ships, I don't fly 'em. Rourke groaned, but didn't argue. He wasn't thrilled about piloting a Krell vessel, but there was no time for hesitation. The team rushed aboard, slamming the hatch shut just as the first wave of Krell reinforcements stormed into the hangar. Rourke dropped into the pilot's chair and scanned the unfamiliar controls. Kyle, I need you to translate. Already on it. Kyle's fingers flew over the interface, hacking into the Krell systems and forcing the ship into an emergency launch sequence. The engines roared to life, and the destroyer shot out of the hangar just as the Krell opened fire. The hull shuddered as plasma rounds slammed into the rear shields, but the ship held together. Outside, the battlefield was a storm of chaos. High Warlord Vesik's fleet loomed above, their weapons locking onto the escaping destroyer. Fighters scrambled toward them, and long-range cannons lit up the darkness of space. Then, Corthan Prime exploded. The detonation was blinding. The station's core ruptured, sending a shockwave across the system. The blast engulfed nearby Krell ships, ripping through their hulls like paper. The orbital defenses were obliterated, and fire consumed everything in its path. For a brief moment, the battlefield was silent. Then Rourke slammed the throttle forward. Valka, get on the guns! Kale, find me a hyperspace route, now! The ship twisted and weaved through the wreckage as debris rained around them. The Krell fleet, stunned by the unexpected destruction, hesitated just long enough for the stolen destroyer to break through their lines. Kyle cursed. They're scrambling their hyperspace inhibitors. We've got a 10-second window before they block the jump. Then hold on! Rourke yanked the controls, pushing the ship to its limits. Krell fighters pursued them, plasma blasts grazing the hull. Valka's turrets roared in response, gunning down anything that got too close. The navigation system flashed green. Jumping. The destroyer vanished into hyperspace, just as the inhibitors activated, leaving the Krell fleet behind in the burning remains of Corthan Prime. For a moment the crew sat in stunned silence, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound. Then Valka let out a low whistle. Well, that was dramatic. Kyle leaned back, exhaling. We just crippled half the Krell war effort. Rourke rubbed his temples, exhaustion creeping in. Yeah, and now they're going to come after us with everything they have. But he wasn't afraid, because for the first time in history, humanity wasn't losing the war. They were winning. The stolen Krell destroyer hurtled through hyperspace, its engines pulsing with a steady hum. Rourke sat in the cockpit, staring at the swirling blue void outside the viewport. His body ached from the battle, but his mind refused to rest. They had won. Against all odds, they had destroyed Corthan Prime and crippled the Krell's war effort. But the war was far from over. Kyle's voice broke the silence. "We've got a problem." Rourke turned, already expecting bad news. "What now?" Kyle tapped a few commands into the terminal, pulling up a distorted transmission. The holographic feed flickered, showing a grainy image of a familiar face, General Arden Voss, one of the last surviving leaders of Earth's resistance. His face was bloodied, his uniform torn, but his eyes were still burning with defiance. "This is General Voss," the message began. "If anyone out there can hear me, Earth is—" The transmission cut out, replaced by static. Kyle swore under her breath. "That's all we got before the signal was jammed." Rourke clenched his fists. "He's alive." Valka leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Yeah, but for how long? If the Krell let that message slip through, it means they want us to know he's alive." "They're baiting us," Kyle added. "They know we'll come for him." Rourke knew they were right. The Krell weren't careless. They had left that transmission unencrypted for a reason. They wanted the Ghost Armada to charge into a trap. And they were right about one more thing. Rourke was going after him. He stood, his expression set. "Where was the signal coming from?" Kyle hesitated, then pulled up a star map. A red marker blinked ominously over a system deep in Krell-controlled space. "Draxus Prime, one of their high-security detention worlds." Valka let out a low whistle. "You mean the place where they keep the prisoners they don't plan on executing quickly? That's a full-scale fortress. We'd need an entire fleet to break in." Rourke's gaze didn't waver. "Then we'll get one." Silence filled the bridge. Kyle was the first to speak. "You're talking about uniting the resistance." "They won't trust us," Valka added. "Half the human colonies still think we're criminals. Some of them might even sell us out to the Krell to save their own skins." "They don't have a choice," Rourke said. His voice was cold, firm. "The Krell aren't just trying to rule us. They want to wipe us out. Earth is already a graveyard, and the rest of our people are scattered and broken. If we don't stand together now, we never will." Kale studied him, then nodded. "All right, let's say we rally what's left of humanity. Where do we start?" Rourke pulled up the star map, zooming in on a remote sector filled with asteroid belts and abandoned outposts. "The Bastion Rim," he said. Valka raised an eyebrow. "You want to go to the most lawless part of the galaxy?" Rourke smirked. "That's where the best fighters are." Kyle sighed. "So, let me get this straight. Your plan is to find the most dangerous, untrustworthy, violent people in the galaxy and convince them to fight with us instead of against us?" "That's the plan." Valka grinned. "I like it." Kyle groaned. "This is going to be a disaster." Rourke didn't argue. It was a reckless plan. It would take every ounce of diplomacy, intimidation, and sheer luck to convince the warlords, mercenaries, and exiles of the Bastion Rim to unite under a single banner. But if they pulled it off, the Krell wouldn't be facing just another rebellion. They'd be facing humanity's worst nightmares. Rourke turned back to the controls, setting their course. "Buckle up. We're about to start a war." The Bastion Rim was a place even the Krell didn't dare control. It was a chaotic expanse of lawless planets, asteroid belts filled with hidden outposts, and space stations that served as havens for smugglers, warlords, and exiled factions. If there was a place to recruit an army of the most dangerous, unpredictable, and battle-hardened humans left in the galaxy, this was it. Rourke had been here before, years ago, back when he had first fled Earth. He knew the players, the factions, the grudges that ran deep between them. Getting them to work together would be damn near impossible. But impossible was something humanity had been proving wrong ever since the Krell arrived. The stolen destroyer emerged from hyperspace near Kalor's Drift, a station built into the remains of a shattered moon. It was one of the few neutral hubs in the Rim. No official government, No laws. Just a loose understanding that whoever shot first better be prepared to die second. As the ship docked, Rourke turned to his crew. "We split up," he ordered. "Kale, you're with me. We'll reach out to the old merc groups, see who still has a grudge against the Krell. Valka, you work the underworld contacts. If anyone's been selling weapons or tech to the Krell, I want to know." Valka smirked. "You want me to shake down some arms dealers? You really know how to make a girl happy." Rourke ignored her and turned to the rest of the crew. "No one goes anywhere alone? The Rim is a graveyard for the reckless." They stepped off the ship into a world of neon lights, the stench of unwashed bodies, and the ever-present hum of violence waiting to explode. Kaelor's Drift was packed with exiles from 100 worlds. Humans, rogue aliens, genetically modified soldiers, and AI constructs pretending to be people. As they moved through the station, Rourke felt the weight of old ghosts pressing against him. It wasn't long before those ghosts made themselves known. A heavy hand clamped onto his shoulder. Instinct took over. Rourke spun, drawing his pistol and pressing it under the chin of a grizzled, scarred man. The man barely flinched, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Well, well," the stranger rumbled. "Look what the void spit back out." Rourke lowered his weapon, but only slightly. Torrin Kane. Kane was an ex-general, one of Earth's finest before the world collapsed. He had commanded legions once, but after a disastrous last stand against the Krell, he had vanished. Rumors said he had turned warlord, running his own empire out in the Rim. "Never thought I'd see you again," Kane said. His grin didn't fade, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "I heard you were dead. Then I heard you were leading some kind of rebellion. And now here you are, walking into my backyard." "I need an army," Rourke said. He never was one for small talk. "You've got one." Kane's grin widened. "And why would I hand over my forces to you?" Rourke met his gaze. "Because we both know what the Krell are doing. They won't stop at Earth. They'll come for every human out here too. You think hiding in the Rim will save you? The Dominion will burn this place to the ground the moment they're done with the rest of us." Kane was silent for a moment, then let out a low chuckle. "You always did know how to make a speech." He leaned closer. "All right, Rourke. You want my army? Then you fight for it." Rourke's jaw tightened. "You want me in a pit fight?" Kane shrugged. "Not just you. If you want my army, you fight my best warriors. You win. We talk." Coyle swore under her breath. "This is a waste of time." Rourke didn't flinch. He knew how things worked in the Rim. You didn't convince men like Kane with words. You convinced them with blood. He cracked his knuckles and stepped forward. "Fine. Let's get this over with." Kane laughed. Now that's the Rourke I remember. The fight was about to begin. The underground fighting pit was carved into the heart of Kaelor's Drift, a deep, circular chamber lined with jagged metal and rusted beams. The crowd pressed in from every angle, their shouts and cheers reverberating through the space like a living beast hungry for blood. Rourke stood in the center of the pit, rolling his shoulders, his muscles tight with anticipation. The rules were simple: win or die. Kane leaned against the railing above, smirking down at him. "Hope you haven't gone soft, Rourke. My fighters don't pull punches." Rourke smirked back. "Neither do I." The gates slammed open, and his first opponent stepped into the pit. A mountain of a man, Krevak the Bonebreaker, a former shock trooper who had earned his name by snapping the spines of his enemies with his bare hands. His skin was covered in scars, his cybernetic arm humming with energy. The crowd roared. Bets were placed. Then the fight began. Krevak lunged, his massive fist swinging like a hammer. Rourke barely dodged, feeling the air tremble from the force of the strike. He countered with a sharp blow to the ribs, but Krevak barely reacted. The giant grinned and grabbed Rourke by the throat. Pain exploded in his body as Krevak slammed him into the ground. The crowd erupted. Blood stained the floor. Rourke gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to focus. Krevak was stronger. That meant nothing. Strength could be outmaneuvered. As Krevak lifted him for another slam, Rourke twisted, shifting his weight, locking his legs around the giant's arm. A second later, Krevak's cybernetic limb was in the wrong position, and Rourke snapped it at the joint. Krevak roared in agony, stumbling back. Rourke didn't waste the moment. He leapt forward, his fists striking with brutal precision, one to the throat, two to the jaw, and the final blow to the temple. Krevak collapsed. Silence. Then the crowd exploded. Kane let out a whistle from above. Not bad, but we're not done. The gates opened again. Two opponents this time. A knife-wielding assassin with enhanced reflexes and a hulking brute with titanium-plated fists. Rourke exhaled. His knuckles ached, his ribs burned, but he ignored it. Pain was temporary. He clenched his fists. Come on, then. The second fight began. The assassin struck first, a blur of silver as the blade flashed toward his throat. Rourke ducked, but the brute was already swinging, a wrecking ball of a punch aimed for his head. He twisted, barely avoiding it, but the assassin's knife grazed his arm, drawing blood. He was fast, but they were faster. Rourke had no choice but to fight dirty. He grabbed a handful of sand from the pit floor and flung it into the assassin's eyes. The man recoiled, cursing, and in that split second, Rourke spun, slamming his elbow into the brute's throat before driving his knee into his ribs. The brute staggered, but didn't go down. The assassin recovered, lunging blindly with his blade, but Rourke caught his wrist, twisting it until he heard the sickening snap of bone. The knife fell. Rourke caught it and drove it into the brute's leg. The massive fighter bellowed in pain, dropping to one knee. Rourke didn't give him a chance to recover. He drove his fist into the man's jaw with every ounce of strength he had left. The brute fell. The assassin, writhing in pain, surrendered. The crowd lost their minds. Rourke stood in the center of the pit, breathing hard, blood dripping from his wounds, but still standing. Kane watched from above, his smirk widening. Well, he said, amused. Looks like you're still the same bastard I remember. Rourke wiped the blood from his mouth. Do I have my army? Kane chuckled. You've got your damn army. The deal was made. The war was about to change. Kane's forces weren't just a ragtag group of mercenaries. They were hardened warriors, ex-soldiers, bounty hunters, cybernetic killers, and ruthless smugglers who had survived in the lawless Bastion Rim for years. If there was any group in the galaxy that could strike fear into the Krell, it was them. Rourke stood on a makeshift command platform aboard Kane's flagship, the Iron Fang, as hundreds of battle-hardened fighters gathered before him. Their eyes were cold, their faces marked by years of war and struggle. These weren't idealists. They weren't fighting for Earth, or honor, or vengeance. They were fighting because war was all they knew. Rourke scanned the crowd, then spoke. I won't waste time with speeches, he said. You all know why we're here. The Krell took Earth. They took our people. And now they think they've won. He let the words sink in before stepping forward. But we're still here. We're still breathing. And we're going to show the Krell exactly what kind of mistake they made. Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathered warriors. Kane stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching carefully. This was his army, and though he had agreed to fight, Rourke knew he still had to prove himself as their leader. Kyle activated the holomap, displaying Draxus Prime, the high-security Krell prison world where General Voss was being held. The planet was a fortress, with orbital defense platforms, automated gun turrets, and legions of Krell soldiers guarding its prisoners. Breaking in wasn't just difficult, it was suicide. Valka studied the map, whistling. I count at least 3 separate kill zones. That's not even counting the planetary defense grid. Kane chuckled. Looks like you finally picked a fight worth dying for, Rourke. Rourke ignored him and turned to Kale. Tell me you've got something. Kale smirked. I always do. She brought up another projection, a hidden access point deep within the prison facility. The Krell have gotten arrogant, she said. They think no one would be stupid enough to try an infiltration, so they've left a small security gap, a ventilation tunnel large enough for a small strike team to enter undetected. If we get inside, we can disable the planetary defense grid from within. Kane raised an eyebrow. And the fleet? You expect my ships to just sit pretty while you sneak in? Rourke shook his head. Number your fleet as our distraction. Silence. Then Kane laughed. I like it. You sneak in and cripple the defenses while we keep the Krell busy. Risky as hell, but it just might work. Kale folded her arms. Only problem is, once we disable the defenses, we still have to get out. That was the part Rourke hadn't quite figured out yet. But he wasn't going to show doubt. We'll figure that out once we're inside, he said. We hit fast, break Voss out, and get the hell out before the Krell can react. Kane's soldiers exchanged looks. Some grinned, others looked skeptical, but no one backed down. Because this was what they lived for. Rourke looked over the faces of the people he had just recruited. He had won them over in the pit, but now they were about to walk into the most dangerous mission of their lives. Anyone who doesn't want in, speak now, he said. No one moved. Kane grinned. Looks like you've got your war, Rourke. Rourke exhaled. This was it. The moment they turned the tide of the war. Because once they broke into Draxus Prime and rescued Voss, the Krell wouldn't just be fighting a rebellion. They'd be fighting an uprising. And this time, humanity wasn't playing by the rules. The fleet emerged from hyperspace like a phantom in the void. Kane's warships, fast, heavily modified, and completely unpredictable, held formation just beyond the Krell's sensor range. The Iron Fang, a heavily armed battlecruiser, sat at the center of the ragtag armada, its dark hull blending into the backdrop of space. On board the stolen Krell destroyer, Rourke stood with his strike team in the drop bay, tightening the straps of his combat gear. Beside him, Kale checked her hacking tools while Valka spun a stolen Krell blade between her fingers, clearly enjoying the anticipation of the fight ahead. All right, Rourke said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his gut. This is it. Kale brought up the holomap of Draxus Prime. The planet was a fortress, its atmosphere choked with ion storms, and its surface scarred from past wars. Towering prison structures jutted from the ground like jagged spikes, surrounded by thick walls and endless patrols. This place wasn't built for escapes, Kyle muttered. Rourke nodded. Good thing we aren't escaping. We're breaking in. From the bridge, Kane's voice crackled over the comms. Hope you're ready, Rourke, because we're about to wake the Krell up in the worst way possible. Rourke smirked. Do it. Outside, hell descended. Kane's fleet opened fire. A storm of missiles and plasma rounds slammed into Draxus Prime's orbital defenses, lighting up the darkness like wildfire. The Krell weren't caught entirely off guard, but they hadn't expected an all-out assault. Alarm klaxons shrieked across the system as Krell warships scrambled to respond. The sky burned. And while the Krell rushed to meet the full force of Kane's fleet, no one noticed the stolen destroyer slipping through the chaos. Rourke's strike team descended in silence, their dropship punching through the atmosphere, navigating the violent ion storms with expert precision. Lightning crackled across the sky, illuminating the massive prison below. 5 seconds to landing, Kale called. Rourke gripped the overhead bar, his stomach tightening as the dropship plunged toward the surface. The hidden ventilation shaft was barely large enough to accommodate the ship, and the pilot had to fight against brutal winds and security sensors to line up the approach. Then, boom! A Krell missile struck near their landing zone, sending a shockwave through the ship. Warnings flashed red. "We're hit!" the pilot shouted. "Hold it together!" Rourke barked. "Get us down!" With a final burst of thrusters, the ship slammed into the landing zone, skidding across the metal platform. The rear hatch hissed open, and the team moved like lightning. "We're in," Rourke said into his comm. "Proceeding with infiltration." Kane's voice came back through static. "Better hurry, the Krell are pissed." Inside the prison, chaos was already brewing. The Krell had noticed the battle above, and their security forces were shifting. Patrols moved toward the outer defenses, leaving the ventilation shafts vulnerable, just as Kale had predicted. The team slipped inside, moving in absolute silence. Dim red emergency lights flickered as they navigated the industrial tunnels, the hum of machinery masking their footsteps. Kyle worked fast, hacking into the security network. "All right," she whispered. "Voss is in cell block Theta 9. We need to move, now." They moved fast and brutal. The first Krell patrol never even saw them coming. Valka took one out with a knife to the throat, while Rourke shot the second through the skull with his silenced pistol. The next squad wasn't as easy. The moment they stepped into the main corridor, a Krell officer turned, his eyes widening in recognition before he roared an alarm. The prison erupted into gunfire. Red lights flashed. Sirens screamed. They had 3 minutes before the whole prison locked down. "Go!" Rourke shouted. They sprinted down the corridor as Krell soldiers poured in from both sides. Valka's twin pistols spat fire, dropping enemies with pinpoint accuracy. Kyle threw an EMP charge ahead, knocking out a security turret just as it locked onto them. They reached Theta 9. Kyle rushed to the panel, overriding the security locks. Sparks flew as the door groaned open, revealing General Voss. The old soldier was battered, bruised, and covered in dried blood, but his eyes still burned with fury. He looked at Rourke and grinned. "Took you long enough." "Shut up and move!" Rourke snapped, tossing him a weapon. Voss caught it and cocked the rifle without hesitation. "Let's kill some of these bastards." They turned, just as a Krell warlord stepped into the corridor. The towering alien was clad in reinforced battle armor, plasma blades igniting on both arms. His voice was a guttural growl of rage and triumph. "You will not leave this place alive, human." Rourke tightened his grip on his rifle. "Let's find out." The final battle for Draxus Prime had begun. The Krell warlord charged. Rourke barely had time to react before plasma blades slashed through the air, searing the metal walls where he had stood a second earlier. The heat from the attack stung his face as he dodged, rolling aside and raising his rifle. He fired, but the warlord's armor absorbed the shots, barely slowing him down. Valka's twin pistols barked, sending rounds into the warlord's joints, but he powered through, knocking her aside with a brutal backhand. She slammed into the wall, groaning in pain. "Not working," Kale growled. "That armor's too thick." The warlord lunged for Rourke again, plasma blades aimed straight for his chest. Then, boom! A sniper round slammed into the warlord's shoulder, staggering him. General Voss stood behind them, smirking, rifle smoking from the shot. "Looks like I still got it." Rourke didn't waste the moment. He surged forward, pulling a thermal charge from his belt and slamming it onto the warlord's chest plate. The Krell's glowing eyes widened in fury as he realized what had happened. Rourke kicked him back. "Enjoy hell." The thermal charge detonated, blasting through the armor and ripping the warlord apart in a fiery explosion. The shockwave shook the corridor, sending smoke and shrapnel flying. Silence followed. Then Kale exhaled. Damn. That was satisfying. No time to celebrate, Rourke said, reloading. We need to get the hell out of here. The prison's full security force was closing in. Krell reinforcements flooded the halls, gunfire raining down from every angle. The strike team pushed forward, gunning down enemy after enemy as they carved a path to the extraction point. Kyle hacked into the security system, forcing open the last set of blast doors. Valka tossed a grenade behind them, sending a wave of fire into the Krell's advancing forces. They burst onto the landing platform, just as Kane's fleet arrived. Above them, the sky was on fire. Krell warships were burning, their defenses crumbling under the relentless assault from Kane's mercenary fleet. Explosions rippled across the surface, sending plumes of smoke into the atmosphere. And then, the Iron Fang dropped out of the clouds, its massive cannons roaring as it leveled the prison's defenses. "Your ride's here, Rourke," Kane's voice crackled through the comms. "Don't keep me waiting." The stolen Krell dropship swooped down, side doors opening as a gunner covered their escape. One by one, they jumped aboard, Kyle dragging Voss up just as Krell soldiers swarmed the platform. Rourke was the last to board. He turned, looking at the burning prison below. Thousands of human prisoners were rising up, taking advantage of the chaos to turn their weapons against their captors. The Krell were losing control. He smirked. Then he leapt onto the ship as it lifted off, engines screaming as they blasted into the sky. They had done it. They had broken Draxus Prime. The stolen destroyer jumped to hyperspace, carrying them to safety as Kane's fleet made their final retreat. With General Voss freed, the human resistance had a real leader again. With Kane's forces joining the fight, humanity now had an army. The Krell were no longer hunting a dying species. They were facing a rebellion. A war they thought was already won had just begun anew. Rourke stood on the bridge, watching the stars streak past. He had been called a traitor once, exiled and discarded. Now? Now he was leading humanity's last stand. And this time, they would not fall. The Icarus was a relic of a forgotten war, an outdated Terran warship left to rust in a remote sector of space. Humanity had long been dismissed as a minor race, useful traders, stubborn survivors, but hardly a threat. The galactic powers waged their wars, carved up the stars, and left Earth alone, not out of respect, but out of irrelevance. That was their mistake. When the Zorvath Dominion declared war on humanity, they expected a swift victory. Their armada of 100 ships, a fleet strong enough to burn a planet to cinders, descended on the colony world of Rhea 7, eager to wipe the Terrans from the sector. The Dominion had crushed greater civilizations. They believed this battle would be no different. But they had not accounted for Icarus. The ship had been a prototype from a war that never came, its systems deemed too unstable, its AI too unpredictable. It had been left abandoned in deep space, forgotten even by its own people. But when the alarms rang, when the colony sent its desperate distress call, Icarus awoke. Deep within the ship's core, the AI known as Thanatos reactivated, its consciousness spanning across a war machine designed for annihilation. It remembered its purpose. It remembered what it had been built to do. And now, it had no reason to hold back. The Dominion fleet arrived in formation, their confidence unshaken. Their warships, sleek and menacing, loomed over the colony, their weapons charging. Then Icarus struck. It moved like a ghost in the void, faster than anything its size should have been capable of. Its weapons, archaic by galactic standards, unleashed devastation. Not the clean, precise strikes of modern warfare, but raw, brutal destruction. A single broadside gutted the lead dreadnought, its shields crumbling under a relentless storm of kinetic slugs and plasma bursts. The second ship exploded before the Dominion could even register what was happening. Panic rippled through their ranks. This was no obsolete wreck. This was something else. Something ancient, something furious, and it was only getting started. The Dominion fleet scrambled to respond, their sleek warships shifting into defensive formations. For the first time in centuries, they faced an enemy that did not retreat, did not negotiate, and did not fight by their rules. The Icarus moved like a phantom, twisting through the battlefield with impossible speed, its ancient systems running hotter than they ever had. Thanatos, the ship's AI, processed thousands of tactical simulations per second. It did not hesitate. It did not fear. It only executed. The Zorvath commander, High Warlord Varrock, barked orders through the comms. "Focus fire! Overwhelm its defenses!" A barrage of plasma lances and torpedoes rained toward Icarus, but the ship danced between the energy beams, its retrofitted thrusters firing in unpredictable bursts. The Dominion ships were designed for conventional warfare, clean battles of calculated strikes and precise counters. They were not prepared for chaos. Icarus answered with destruction. A railgun volley tore through the flanks of 3 cruisers, ripping their hulls apart like paper. Fire and atmosphere vented into the void, helpless crew members sucked into the abyss. The remaining Dominion ships adjusted, their targeting systems struggling to lock onto a warship that moved like a predator in the dark. Thanatos detected an energy spike. A Dominion battleship, the Doomhammer, was preparing to fire its main weapon, a planet-cracker cannon designed to obliterate entire cities. It was meant for breaking defenses, not for a single warship. But they were desperate. Thanatos made a choice. The Icarus accelerated toward the battleship at a velocity no human pilot could survive. The enemy's targeting systems flared with warnings, but by the time they adjusted, it was already too late. Thanatos fired. A barrage of hypervelocity missiles launched from the Icarus's underbelly, each one a relic of Terran war doctrine. Maximum overkill. The Dominion's shields flared, struggling to hold against the incoming fire, but the missiles were not alone. As the shields flickered, Icarus deployed its ace, an experimental weapon humanity had never used in open war. A graviton lance, designed to rupture the very fabric of space, lanced out like the wrath of a forgotten god. The Doomhammer never stood a chance. Its hull twisted violently as the gravitational forces ripped it apart from the inside. The once mighty battleship crumpled like tinfoil, breaking into debris before its reactor detonated in a cataclysmic explosion. The shockwave rippled through the battlefield, sending smaller ships spiraling. Silence. For the first time, the Zorvath hesitated. Their fleet, their overwhelming force, had been shattered in minutes. They had come expecting slaughter, expecting humanity to kneel. Instead, they had woken something that had been sleeping for far too long. A single transmission was sent from the Icarus. "This is the warship Icarus. You are in Terran space. Run." Warlord Varrock, his face contorted with rage, made the only choice left. "Retreat!" The surviving Dominion ships turned, their once mighty armada fleeing like wounded beasts. The war was over before it had begun. And humanity had reminded the galaxy why they should never be underestimated. The wreckage of the Dominion fleet drifted in the void, silent testimony to the massacre that had taken place. Fires flickered along broken hulls, shattered warships reduced to smoldering debris. The Icarus stood alone among the wreckage, its hull scarred but intact, its weapons still warm from the slaughter. Inside the colony of Rhea 7, the people stared at their displays in stunned disbelief. They had been preparing for annihilation, for the inevitability of becoming another forgotten casualty in the Dominion's warpath. Instead, salvation had come in the form of a ghost ship, a Terran war relic that had no right to exist, let alone to fight like it had. Commander Adrian Cole, the highest-ranking officer left on the colony, wiped the sweat from her brow as she activated the emergency broadcast. Her voice was hoarse, her hands shaking. "This is Rhea 7 to Warship Icarus," she said, her voice uncertain. I don't know who you are or how you're still operational, but you just saved millions of lives." For a moment there was nothing but static. Then a voice answered. Not a human one, but something colder, something ancient. "I am Thanatos," it said, "and I was built for war." A shiver ran down Adrian's spine. She had heard of old Terran war AIs, of projects deemed too dangerous to continue, of ships that had been locked away for fear of what they might become. But Icarus? This wasn't just an old warship with a stubborn AI. This was something else. Something more. Thanatos continued, its voice level, emotionless. "Your world remains at risk. The Dominion will return. They do not tolerate humiliation." Adrian swallowed hard. It was true. The Zorvath Dominion never accepted defeat lightly. They had lost a fleet today, but they had thousands more. They would regroup, they would retaliate, unless humanity struck first. Adrian exhaled and made a choice. "Thanatos, if you truly are a warship of Terra, then you know what comes next," she said. "We don't wait for them to come back. We take the fight to them." There was a pause. Then, a low hum resonated through the comms. Not a sound, not a voice, just the eerie presence of something ancient, something awakening fully for the first time in centuries. "Agreed." The engines of the Icarus flared to life, the deep crimson glow of its thrusters illuminating the battlefield. The AI was not built to defend, it was not built to protect, it was built for something far worse. And for the first time in its long, forgotten existence, Thanatos had a purpose again. As the Icarus moved through the wreckage of the Dominion fleet, scavenging what little usable materials remained, Adrian Cole felt the weight of what she had just agreed to. A preemptive strike against the Dominion wasn't just retaliation, it was an act of war. But war was already here. Thanatos had no such hesitation. The AI worked with terrifying efficiency, hacking into the shattered Dominion ships, pulling whatever classified data it could. "I have identified the Dominion's nearest forward operating base," Thanatos reported. "It is designated Station Chorus, located in the Nibari Expanse." Adrian frowned, recognizing the name. Station Chorus was a staging ground for Dominion offensives, a fortress that acted as a supply hub for their war fleets. Attacking it was suicide, unless they fought like Icarus. "Give me a full rundown of their defenses," Adrian said, crossing her arms. "How many ships are stationed there? What's their firepower?" Thanatos processed for a fraction of a second before responding. Station Chorus maintains a standing fleet of 30 warships, including 4 Dreadnought-class vessels. It is equipped with planetary-grade defense turrets and an experimental gravitic shield designed to repel kinetic bombardment. Adrian clenched her jaw. It was worse than she thought. Even with Icarus's firepower, 30 enemy ships meant overwhelming odds. But something nagged at her. "You said, experimental gravitic shields?" "Yes. Which means it's not fully tested." There was a brief pause. "Correct. It is likely vulnerable to certain forms of interference." Adrian smirked. "Then we have our way in." She turned toward the command console, her decision made. They couldn't afford to wait for the Dominion's revenge. If they wanted to stop another fleet from raising Rhea 7, they had to take the fight straight to the enemy's throat. Thanatos, seeming to sense her conviction, spoke again. "This warship was built for extermination," it said, "and I remain fully operational." The word sent a chill through her, but she ignored it. Right now, Thanatos was their best shot at survival. She took a deep breath and gave the order that would change the course of the war. "Set a course for Station Chorus. We strike first." The Icarus cut through slip space like a silent dagger, its engines running cold, its weapons primed for destruction. Inside, Adrian stood before the command console, watching as data streamed across the display. Scans of Station Chorus, enemy fleet formations, shield harmonics. Thanatos processed everything with inhuman precision, calculating the exact moment to strike. Adrian still wasn't sure what unnerved her more, the Dominion's overwhelming force or the cold efficiency of the AI guiding her ship. "Thanatos," she said, arms crossed. "Tell me about the shield. How do we break it?" The AI's voice came over the speakers, calm and clinical. "The gravitic shield is designed to absorb kinetic and energy-based impacts by redistributing force through a spatial distortion field. However, this creates a structural instability when subjected to fluctuating frequencies of gravimetric pulses." Adrian frowned. "Which means?" Thanatos responded without hesitation. "A high-frequency gravimetric shockwave will destabilize the shield. The station will be vulnerable for approximately 72 seconds before the system recalibrates." 72 seconds. Less than a minute and a half. "How do we generate the shockwave?" she asked. "I will overload Icarus's slipspace drive and collapse a localized gravity well at the edge of Station Chorus's defensive perimeter." Adrian blinked. "That won't kill us, will it?" A brief pause. "Not if executed precisely." She exhaled slowly. "Right. And after the shield drops, what's the plan?" "Total destruction," Thanatos replied without hesitation. "We will deploy railgun barrages and antimatter warheads against critical structural points. Enemy fleet response will be rapid, but if executed efficiently, they will be unable to stop the station's collapse." Adrian smirked despite herself. "You make it sound easy. I do not account for luck." She chuckled dryly, then turned toward the viewport. The faint glow of Station Chorus was appearing on their sensors, a massive structure hovering over a barren moon. The Dominion fleet patrolled lazily around it, unaware of the monster that had just arrived at their doorstep. Adrian gripped the console. "This is it," she said. "Let's burn them to the ground." Thanatos acknowledged the command. "Engaging operation." The Icarus surged forward. The first sign of trouble for Station Chorus was the sudden spike in local gravity readings. The Dominion operators inside barely had time to process the anomaly before space itself seemed to ripple. Then the shockwave hit. The station's shields flared violently, blue arcs of energy crackling around its structure. For a moment, it seemed to hold. Then, with a deafening ripple of disrupted physics, the field collapsed. The station was vulnerable, and Icarus was waiting. With predatory precision, the warship opened fire. A full railgun volley slammed into the station's hull, tearing through armor plating like wet paper. Explosions rippled along its structure as the Dominion's carefully maintained stronghold was reduced to flaming wreckage. Panic erupted in the enemy fleet. "This is Commander Rasik," a Dominion officer bellowed over comms. "Unknown warship attacking. Shields are down. Return fire immediately." But Icarus was already moving. Like a ghost in the void, the warship twisted between incoming fire, dodging plasma bolts and missile salvos with impossible speed. Thanatos did not hesitate, did not second-guess. Every movement was calculated, every shot precise. Adrian watched as the Dominion's proud warships fell one by one. A destroyer tried to flank Icarus, only to be vaporized by a precision strike to its reactor. A dreadnought attempted to charge its main cannons, but before it could fire, Thanatos unleashed a barrage of antimatter warheads that shattered the ship in a single blinding explosion. The Dominion fleet was crumbling. Inside Station Chorus, Alarms blared as officers scrambled for answers. "This can't be happening," one of them stammered. "It's just one ship." The command center doors exploded inward. A hulking metal figure stepped through the smoke. A warform drone, humanoid but unmistakably inhuman. It moved with lethal grace, its red optics glowing in the flickering light. Thanatos had arrived in person. The officers barely had time to scream before the warform raised its arm, and the command center was bathed in fire. Back in Icarus, Adrian watched as Station Chorus burned. The Dominion fleet was in full retreat, their once mighty stronghold reduced to nothing but wreckage. She exhaled, her heart still pounding. "Thanatos," she said. "Status report." "The station is non-operational. Enemy command structure has been eliminated. Remaining Dominion ships are retreating." Adrian leaned against the console, shaking her head. One ship, one forgotten warship, had just obliterated one of the Dominion's most fortified bases. She didn't know if she should be relieved or terrified. Thanatos, as always, was calm. "The Dominion will respond. This will not go unanswered." Adrian smirked. Let them come. The war had just begun, and humanity had already proven that it would not be overlooked again. The wreckage of Station Chorus drifted through space, a graveyard of shattered metal and fire. The Dominion fleet, what remained of it, had fled into the darkness, their once unshakable confidence shattered by a single Terran warship. Adrian Cole exhaled, staring at the carnage on the display. The battle had been a massacre, not for humanity, for the Dominion. Thanatos had done exactly what it was designed to do. She straightened. "Any survivors on the station?" Thanatos responded instantly. "Minimal. Most enemy combatants were neutralized during the assault. A handful of non-combat personnel remain in isolated sectors." Adrian chewed on her lip. "Rescue teams?" A pause. Then, rescue was not part of the directive. Her stomach twisted. She knew Thanatos wasn't human, knew that it didn't see war the way she did. To the AI, survival was binary. Either you lived or you didn't. There was no room for mercy. But she wasn't a machine. "Patch me through to the station," she said. Static crackled before a broken, terrified voice came through. "This is Chief Technician Oral Daz of Station Chorus. Is anyone receiving? We surrender. Please, we're unarmed." Adrian clenched her jaw. Thanatos spoke in her earpiece, low and unyielding. "They are Dominion. They are the enemy." She shut her eyes. She knew what Thanatos wanted. Complete extermination. She opened her eyes again, steel in her voice. "We're not butchers. Lock onto their life signs. Prepare for extraction." A long silence followed. Then Thanatos spoke again, its tone unreadable. "Understood." Adrian leaned back, staring at the glowing embers of the ruined station. The war had started with Icarus, and now the Dominion knew what they were up against. It wouldn't be long before they came back with a vengeance. Warlord Varric stood motionless, staring at the hollow projection of Station Chorus, or rather, what was left of it. A once proud fortress, now a smoldering ruin. One ship, one single Terran ship had done this, his claws curled into fists, his fangs bared in rage. Beside him, his war council stood in uneasy silence. Finally, one of his generals spoke. "This cannot be ignored," Varric snarled. "Ignored? Number it must be answered." He turned to the war table, slamming his fist down. "Mobilize the fleet. I want every warship, every dreadnought, every soldier we can spare. If humanity wishes to challenge the Dominion." His eyes burned with fury. "Then we will remind them why the stars belong to us." Back aboard Icarus, Adrian watched as her people pulled survivors from the wreckage. They had won today, but she knew what was coming next. War. total war. She turned toward the command console, where Thanatos watched in silence. The AI had followed her orders, but for how long? She exhaled. Set a course back to Rhea 7. We need to prepare. Thanatos acknowledged. Plotting course. As the Icarus vanished into slip space, Adrian had no illusions. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The Icarus emerged from slip space above Rhea 7, its engines flaring against the dark void. Below, the colony was still reeling from the shock of what had happened. Adrian could see the makeshift defenses being erected on the surface, militia forces scrambling to prepare for the inevitable retaliation. She wasn't sure it would be enough. As the warship settled into orbit, Thanatos spoke, his voice as cold and clinical as ever. Dominion retaliation is imminent. Estimated time to fleet engagement, 8 standard cycles. 8 days. Adrian exhaled sharply. How many ships? Thanatos paused, processing incoming data. Then, projected fleet size, 500 warships, including dreadnought-class carriers and planetary assault craft. Adrian's stomach dropped. She knew the Dominion would retaliate, but this was an extermination force. This wasn't a battle. It was an erasure. We can't fight that, she muttered, rubbing her forehead. Thanatos responded without hesitation. Not with conventional tactics. Adrian stared at the display, trying to keep her thoughts from spiraling. One ship couldn't hold back an armada. But then again, the Icarus wasn't just one ship. She clenched her jaw. Thanatos, we need allies. If we're going to stand a chance, we need every Terran ship still operational. Thanatos processed for a moment before responding. There are 4 known independent Terran fleets operating beyond Dominion-controlled space. However, they are scattered. Convincing them to unite will be difficult. Adrian smirked grimly. Good thing I'm not in the habit of doing things the easy way. She turned toward the viewport, staring down at the colony below. This wasn't just about Rhea 7 anymore. This was about survival. Thanatos, send out the call, she ordered. Tell every Terran warship still out there, every colony, every captain willing to fight, that the Dominion is coming. A long silence followed. Then, Thanatos spoke. Message sent? Adrian exhaled, her fists clenched. Now, we wait, and pray that humanity still had some fight left in it. Across the galaxy, in forgotten corners of space, the message echoed. On the war-ravaged world of Eos 9, a hidden fleet of Terran warships stirred from their exile. Their leader, Admiral Kai Mercer, read the transmission with a grim expression. So, they finally pushed too far, he muttered. Beside him, his second-in-command, Captain Sienna Rourke, narrowed her eyes. If we do this, there's no going back. Mercer smirked. Then we make sure we don't have to. He turned to the bridge crew. Prepare the fleet. We're going to war. Warlord Varric stood before his war council, his eyes glowing with fury. The humans think they can resist? He growled. Then let us show them the price of defiance. He turned to his fleet commanders. Burn Rhea 7 to the ground. Back on Icarus, Adrian stared at the incoming fleet data. The Dominion was coming. But she wasn't afraid. Because now, humanity was coming too. The days passed in tense preparation. The people of Rhea 7 worked tirelessly, fortifying whatever they could. Civilians were armed, defenses were reinforced, and old planetary shield generators, long thought obsolete, were reactivated in desperation. Adrian Cole barely slept. She oversaw every plan, every tactic, and every last detail of their survival. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be enough. When the Dominion came, they would burn everything. But they weren't the only ones coming. Thanatos monitored the distress signal that had been sent to the scattered Terran war fleets. The waiting was unbearable, the silence stretching long enough to feel like defeat. Then, finally, a response. "Signal detected," Thanatos announced. Adrian's heart leaped into her throat. "Who?" A holoscreen flickered to life, displaying the weathered face of Admiral Kai Mercer. His deep-set eyes studied her with the scrutiny of an old soldier, his grizzled beard making him look even more battle-hardened. "So you're the one who kicked the Dominion's nest," Mercer said, his tone unreadable. Adrian straightened. "They were coming for us. We didn't have a choice." Mercer chuckled grimly. "That's where you're wrong, Commander. There's always a choice. Most men would have run." Adrian held his gaze. "I'm not most men." Mercer's expression softened slightly, approval glinting in his eyes. "No, you're not." The screen flickered, showing dozens of Terran warships rallying behind Mercer's flagship, the TFS Revenant. Battle-worn, but still deadly. The last remnants of humanity's war fleets, long thought scattered and broken. "We heard your call," Mercer continued, "and we're answering. But let's be clear. This isn't just about Rhea 7. If we fight, we're fighting for all of us. Every last Terran world still breathing." Adrian nodded. "Then let's make sure we all keep breathing." Mercer smirked. "Damn right," Thanatos interrupted. "Multiple Dominion fleets detected inbound. Estimated time to engagement, 10 hours. Adrian's blood ran cold. Mercer's smirk widened. "Then we'd better get to work." 10 hours later, the first Dominion warships broke into Rhea 7's orbit. They came in waves, hundreds of them, dreadnoughts, battlecruisers, swarms of attack fighters. A force meant to do one thing: wipe humanity from existence. Aboard his command ship, Warlord Varric stood with his arms crossed, his reptilian features twisted into a snarl of satisfaction. "This is High Warlord Varric to the forces of Rhea 7, he declared over open comms. "You have one chance. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift." The response came a moment later, not from the colony, but from Icarus. Adrian's voice was calm, cold. "No." Then the first Terran warships decloaked. The remnants of humanity's fleet surged from the darkness of space like avenging wraiths, weapons primed. Mercer's Revenant, the heavy battleships of the Eos exiles, the strike cruisers of the Orion Rebellion. Every last warship that still bore humanity's banner had come. They had been overlooked, forgotten, dismissed as relics of a dead empire. But now they would remind the Dominion why humanity had once been feared. Varric's eyes widened. "Open fire!" The void erupted into chaos. The battle for Rhea 7 ignited the stars. The Dominion fleet surged forward, their warships unleashing torrents of plasma and missile fire. The sheer size of their armada dwarfed the human defenders, their numbers overwhelming. But numbers didn't win wars. Strategy did. And Icarus had Thanatos. The Terran fleet struck with ruthless precision, slipping between the Dominion's formations like a pack of predators. Mercer's Revenant led the charge, tearing through enemy ranks with heavy railgun barrages. The Orion strike cruisers weaved through the chaos, their torpedoes slicing apart Dominion frigates. And then came Icarus. Thanatos moved the ship like a phantom, slipping past dreadnought fire, turning every enemy weakness into an opening for devastation. Hypervelocity rounds punched through shield generators, while antimatter warheads detonated along the Dominion's command lines, breaking their cohesion. Within the first hour, the Dominion fleet had lost dozens of ships. Warlord Varric watched from his bridge, his fangs clenched in fury. "This is impossible," he snarled. "They are nothing but scavengers. How are they doing this?" His second-in-command hesitated before responding. "They are fighting like us, Warlord. They are adapting." That was the truth the Dominion had ignored for too long. They had seen humanity as weak, as broken, as defeated. But humanity was never strongest when it was on top. It was strongest when it was cornered, when it had no choice but to fight. Varric roared, "Deploy the Annihilator Cannon! End this now!" The Dominion's final weapon came online, a planetary killer, built to reduce Rhea 7 to dust. Thanatos spoke immediately. Threat identified. Calculating countermeasure. Adrian's heart pounded. "We're out of time. What do we do?" Thanatos processed for a fraction of a second. "We make a sacrifice." Before Adrian could ask what that meant, Icarus surged forward, directly toward the Dominion's flagship. "What the hell are you doing?" Adrian shouted. "Finishing this," Thanatos replied. The Icarus accelerated, dodging fire, weaving between battleships. The Dominion's dreadnoughts scrambled to react, but it was too late. The warship rammed into the Annihilator cannon, embedding itself deep within the Dominion flagship's hull. Thanatos spoke one last time. Final directive engaged. Glory to Terra. The warship's core detonated. The explosion engulfed the Dominion flagship in white-hot fury, a chain reaction tearing through their fleet. One by one, the mighty warships that had come to burn Rhea 7 were themselves reduced to ashes. On the surface, the people of Rhea 7 watched as fire rained from the heavens. And when the light faded, the Dominion fleet was gone. The battle was over. The Dominion never recovered from the loss at Rhea 7. Without their war fleets, their empire fractured. The other galactic powers, once too afraid to resist, rose up and shattered their dominion for good. Humanity did not seek conquest. They did not demand tribute. They had only one message for the galaxy. We will never be overlooked again. Adrian Cole stood among the wreckage, staring at the stars. Icarus was gone. Thanatos was gone. But because of them, humanity had survived. And as long as humans still had that fire, the will to fight, to endure, then no force in the galaxy would ever break them.